welcome to another episode of a Wicked Parley. I'm your host, Justin, and I have a special guest with me today. And my guest is my good friend Mike. He is a former U.S. Army soldier, and today we're going to discuss some military questions, and I figure he'd be a good person to speak to this particular thing. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Hello, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to talk.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, what exactly you think is the first thing that you want to talk about when it comes to military? Like, what is the thing that you think is most important?
Well, let's see. First important, in terms of the military, I think anyone who looks at the military, whether you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective or you want to look at it as a possible career option, the first thing you have to understand is giving it the right perception of how you view it. The military is, in my opinion, a force for fighting wars. That's essentially what it is meant for, and the Army is no exception. It's land-based combat, land-based warfare. It's meant to fight and win wars. So it's not for everyone. People from the outside looking in, they're going to see things. They're going to see the culture of it. They're going to see how very top-down it is. And I experienced that firsthand numerous times. There were several. That's one of the reasons why I'm still not in the Army, is just because I was exposed to how the Army is, the Army lifestyle, and while I was able to tolerate it for the 6 years that I was in, it doesn't necessarily, I just felt like I wasn't cut out for that to go the full 20, 30 years. Now, other people do. My older sister, is in the Air Force. She's gone full career. Her husband, full career. So, some people do have the right mentality to serve, and it really takes a mindset of being able to know what it is, understand that it is not the most optimal in terms of like a utopian, civilization. It's very top down, it's authoritarian. You have to shelve certain aspects that you would, certain freedoms that you would like freedom of speech. It's one thing, you're not allowed to criticize, the government or the president when you're in there. It's illegal. You can get heavily punished if you speak out of turn. So you have to have the right mindset to understand what it is, what the culture is, and to be able to function and, to live in it effectively. You have to really understand that that civilian life and military life are very different from top to bottom.
I have, over time, I've heard multiple people discuss different things about the military. Some people have huge objections to the whole concepts surrounding war and the idea of sending people to go fight. I mean, obviously in the past there was things like the Vietnam War, which had huge conflict with people not wanting to go fight and things like that. Do you think that there are any holdovers or leftovers from previous conflicts that affect the doctrine of the military today?
We definitely are trying. The military, from what I understand, is always it's not hesitant to look back and want to improve. It really does like to look at least the unit that I was in. I was in the MEDAC unit, which is the medical corps. We were in a hospital with the 68 series, 68 Papa, 68 whiskeys, and so on and so forth. So the medical field that I was in, MEDAC, we're not combat, gung ho. We're more of we're more of a chill unit. Now, when it comes to looking at war, we weren't pro-war. We're not super gung-ho. We weren't super nationalist in terms of America can do no wrong. Most people, the Vietnam War, most people look at the Vietnam War and go yeah, that was a big mistake. The military really had no business being in there, and most people look at the American government and say, what the hell? My father was against the Vietnam War from the start. He was part of the people marching in streets, and so I understand how people look at the Army and they look at the past mistakes that it played parts in, and they can definitely understand why, they could be hesitant to, not trust it entirely. I understand how people are very skeptical of the government, and the military is part of the government, and it is essentially the muscle that can enforce the government. I mean,
it's one of the many weapons in the arsenal that the U.S. has. It's not just one, but it's not just the only one, but it's a tool of many.
Absolutely. I mean, Andrew Jackson in the Trail of Tears, I believe he utilized the military to forcefully remove all of the Cherokee tribe, I believe, to evict them from their land, in which I believe he did illegally. But because of the power the president had at the time, I believe he was able to issue direct orders, even though the government said he couldn't do that. He's like, raise an army and stop me. I believe that's how I believe. I'm definitely paraphrasing and condensing it, but I believe the military does have its fair share of injustices that it has played a part in. Absolutely.
Do you think, we'll talk about military stuff in a little bit because I want to ask you some questions relating to some of your personal background when it comes to this. But before we do that, I would like to know when it comes to the whole Andrew Jackson thing and the whole idea that, hey, I'm just going to create an army to stop me. Do you think that's something that could happen today? Like, do you think that another army built of American soldiers in a Civil War-esque type of combat scenario, is that even possible?
Ooh, that's a good question. In terms of in other words, are you certain U.S. taking the army today and splitting it into two factions that would war with one another? Is that what you're asking?
Well, hypothetically, it could be that, but we're saying something to the effect of, let's say the military created an action that was something like more or less, hey, you guys create an army to stop us because we're going to do this. Is it even possible that a civilian-based military could be created to combat the current U.S. military?
So say the current military, say for instance our government goes a little tyrannical, a little too far, and I understand that there are a lot of Second Amendment lovers who like to think that holding our arms is useful. The military is very well armed, very capable. I don't think that a self-made militia could really stand up to the full might. Now, I do understand that the U.S. military would probably not go all out against its own countrymen, even if those countrymen were labeled as traitors. I just don't think that that's just how it is. Then again, most people that I've spoken to in the military are definitely what you would consider centrist or conservative. They're not just going to blindly follow orders. If they, one of the things that we as soldiers, even as low-rank grunts, as privates and specialists, we are encouraged to, it's like disobeying orders is frowned upon. However, if you are given an order that you as a person feel that is illegal, immoral, or unethical, then disobeying it is a big risk, but you can choose to not obey it and then go somewhere else, go up to a different higher ranking person and say, I was given a direct order by this superior. He gave me this order. I don't agree with it for these reasons. Mm-hmm. So you can essentially be like, hey, my sergeant just gave me this order, and you go up to his superior NCO or you go up to the unit commander, and you can essentially lodge an official complaint saying, I was given this order, I disagree with it. So the Army, I don't think the civilians would be able to stand up to the Army, but I don't think the Army would just willfully go along with the order of attacking its own countrymen and brothers and sisters. I just don't see that happening based on my experience in the military. Then again, I was with one unit and one unit only, MEDAC, the 68 series. I'm pretty sure that there are probably some people that would blindly follow orders. It's just law of averages. People are going to do that. But I get the feeling that that the military is comprised of most people who are rational thinkers, who are encouraged. This is part of our training, mental resiliency. You're trained not to just blindly follow orders regardless.
Do you think that that particular role is a good thing? That the fact that hey, don't just blindly follow orders. I mean, to me, logically, that's an obvious. Of course, it's a good thing because it prevents some pretty horrible things that could potentially happen. But do you think that in a daily routine sort of way, something that you could actually run into pretty commonly, does that make sense to have that there, or is it more like this is a worst case scenario situation?
It's more of an emergency outlet in case you feel like something really bad is about to happen if you follow those orders. Generally though, when I was my day-to-day life in the military, it was very simple and mundane. If you were given hey, we're gonna go do PT at this time at this location, be there in the right time, right place, right uniform. Most of the orders given are very mundane. If you choose not to follow them, that you're usually pulled up to the side and be like, hey, and they're like, hey man, we're not asking too much of you, and sometimes you'll be given corrective duty, one of the more effective ones was a punishment of eating away your time, eating away your personal time. So it'd be like, okay, what time do you usually leave? Okay, 4 p.m. All right, so from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. you're going to be out in the parking lot picking up cigarette butts. For 1 hour, you're going to walk around the entire parking lot, around the hospital, all the main parking lots, we give you a pair of gloves and a trash bag, pick up cigarette butts off the ground. You do that for 1 hour and then you can go home. You're going to do that for 5 days in a row, from Monday through Friday.
That's a punishment?
That would be a punishment. That would be considered, a disciplinary action. Old school stereotypes would be considered smoking, where they just make you do push-ups until you reach muscle failure. Mm-hmm. That's more discouraged now. Now, I'm pretty sure there are some units that do that. Mm-hmm. There's also the quote-unquote wall-to-wall counseling. I'm not sure if you've heard of that term.
No, but we'll talk about those things in a second. I want to talk about that, but I think I want to jump into a couple of things before then. Mm-hmm. So obviously you're pretty well versed when it comes to things involving the military, at least the Army, from your lived experience. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'd like to know is that what made you decide, hey, I want to join the military? What was the thing that spurred you into pursuing that type of life for yourself?
Well, first off, it wasn't the most noble and selfless of reasons. When I was looking for a career in the medical field, and then I eventually, after taking, I believe, a Myers-Briggs test in college, at American River College, I came across, they put you into 16 categories, and depending upon which category you fall into, these are people with your personality traits and behavioral mannerisms. These are careers that people like you excel at and enjoy. And I'm like, that for me was the first step, is I don't want to find a career that just pays well. I don't want to find a career that I'm good at. I want to find a career that I like. Something that, I don't want to have a job, I want a career. Something that I could see myself doing the rest of my life.
So is it something like fulfillment? Like a purpose?
Yeah, a satisfying self-fulfillment, something I feel pride in. Something that some people have jobs that they show up to every day and they just don't like. I don't want that for myself. I don't want to wake up every day and just being like, damn, I don't want to go in today. Mm-hmm. And some people contemplate calling out depending upon who they're working with. Like if I'm working alongside this guy or this lady, some people will call in sick. Just because of who they're working next to that day. Mm-hmm. I don't want it. I don't like that type of mentality. I can't stop other people from having it, but I can discourage that from myself and being part of what I perceive to be a problem. Because if I have that behavior, who does that negatively impact the most? Myself.
Yourself, sure.
So, I was looking at a career field that I knew I would enjoy, mm-hmm. and I took Myers-Briggs test and another test, I can't remember the name, but both of them suggested the field of radiology.
Well, also, when it comes to the Myers-Briggs test, I mean, obviously, it's not exactly there's several versions of it. Mm-hmm. So, when it came to the questions, there would have been a 160 question version, a 60 question version, and a 30 question version.
I think I was around the 60. It definitely wasn't a short test, and I don't think it was a 100 plus. I want to say it was something I did in 30, 40 minutes.
Do you recall roughly what your 4-letter Myers-Briggs?
I do.
What were they?
ISTP.
ISTP.
I know that. I remember what the I stands for. Introverted. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that definitely fits me. Throughout most of my childhood and young adult life, I was very introverted. It was only until college where I first met you, where it's college where I met all my close friends, Matt, you, and it's really, I started to come out of my shell. But throughout all of my young adolescence and teenage years, I was very introverted. So, so I was ISTP, and the field of radiology, was one of the jobs that I'm like, okay, it's in the medical field. Another idea was plumber, and I'm like, no, thank you. No hating on all the plumbers out there, but it just didn't appeal to me. It's got to be an appealing job, If it sounds terrible right off the bat, I'm probably not going to give it the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
So I wanted the field of radiology. Now, I went to Yuba College. I was at ARC, fulfilled my prerequisites, submitted my application to Yuba College, got accepted, did my Yuba College thing 2 years, got my degree, got my license, national certification. Then I was at a problem where I graduated in 2011, and I could not find work for over an entire calendar year. I graduated in the summer of 2011, and by the summer of 2012, I had yet to find any work.
It was a pretty rough time, though, when it came to finding jobs.
It was. The market was saturated. There was too many techs, not enough jobs. And a lot of the places were offering per diem slots, but they wanted experienced techs only, even for per diem slots, which is rough, considering I'm like, I need these per diem slots so that I can gain my experience so I can work my up to part-time and full-time. But it was an endless cycle of, you can't get this job because you don't have experience. Well, you don't have experience because you can't get this job. So it was an endless cycle of problem A causing problem B and B causing problem A. It was just an endless cycle, and I was the one getting screwed by it. I'm not going to hold anything against the medical profession if their hands are tied based on like budget or whatever problems that they were having, that they couldn't create slots for entry level people like myself. If they couldn't create them, they couldn't create them. I'm not going to hold it against them. But I was like, you know what? It's been a year. I can't keep going like this. So I looked towards the military. Initially, I was going through the Navy. I was going to be a medical corpsman, but then but the medical corpsman had a catch to it. You could be, if you applied for a Navy for medical corpsman, you could be any job in the hospital that they needed you to. You wouldn't just be the radiology tech that you wanted. You couldn't guarantee that slot. So I was like, I don't like this. But then I found out the recruiting station right next to the Navy, the Army one, they had a specific MOS, 68 Papa, radiology specialist. X-ray tech and X-ray tech only. No strings attached. You're not going to be thrown into the laboratory. You're not going to be thrown up into the psych ward. You're not going to be a bedpan cleaner. You're just going to be an X-ray tech. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is what I want. I was a stubborn mule, for lack of a better word, to my recruiters until I literally got the job, the MOS that I wanted. I technically should not have gotten it, but because because I went to my recruiter and I asked them, hey, I want to be a 68 Papa. Now, because of my age, I was 27 at the time. They're like, we offer that MOS to people who are high school graduates. Depending upon your age, when you go to a recruiting station, they will offer you certain slots, certain time out. So 68 Papa, the radiology specialist, was actually snapped up by young high school grads or college dropouts that were younger than me. They were in their teens and early 20s. Me being in my mid to late 20s. They were those younger guys were taking up the jobs before they would appear in my search engine, before I was allowed to even look at them. So my recruiters are like, there's no jobs that are falling to you. So I have to, like where they could pick that slot 6 months out from being sent, I can only pick them, I think, 3 months out. So, but I didn't want to give up. They wanted to offer me a 68 Whiskey, which is a combat medic, and I'm like, no, I want to be 68 Papa, and only a Papa.
Okay.
So after a few weeks of back and forth where I wasn't getting anywhere, I made a phone call. I did something that is kind of frowned upon in the military, but I wasn't a soldier yet, so I didn't care. I made a phone call directly to the cell phone of the first sergeant, who was in charge of all the Army recruiting in the Sacramento, Roseville region.
Sure.
I called him on his cell phone. I was at home, and I kind of sold myself over the phone to him, and I told him, hey, look, First Sergeant, we've got this issue where I'm at your recruiting station. I want this MOS specifically. I'm already licensed nationally. I'm nationally certified. So I am not a gamble. I am a guaranteed investment. And that's one thing I would definitely advertise people learn how to do, is learn how to market themselves, to sell themselves, to make themselves more valuable, or even seem more valuable. That's definitely a skill that I think would best serve a lot of people, is know how to market yourself, know how to sell yourself and make yourself look valuable to others so that they're willing to take that chance on you. So I called him up, I sold myself over the phone to him, and basically told him, I could literally swear in today, fly anywhere in the country you want me to, and I'll shoot x-rays the next day. And he's like, well, I mean, you got to go through boot camp, but I understand what you're saying. You're saying that you've already proven that you can do x-rays. You're 100% qualified. And I'm like, absolutely. So the funny thing is, when I called him, because I was sitting at home on the couch, in a t-shirt and shorts, he was physically standing in my recruiting office right when I made that call. So as he was talking to me, from what I was told, he put it on speakerphone, heard everything I was saying, turned and looked at the senior recruiter in my recruiting office, pointed, and said, make something happen. So when a high-ranking first sergeant literally said, sign this guy up, get him what he wants.
Yeah.
So I literally received a phone call the next day from my recruiter saying, we got you a slot as a 68 Papa. And I'm like, okay. They're like, are you willing to come down today? I literally left my job at Target early I told my supervisor, and I'm like, I'm leaving early. I'm going to go sign these papers. And he's like, all right, go ahead. They were accommodating. They didn't fire me for that. They were nice enough to let me go sign. I went in, signed, and that started the process of me joining the military. So the real reason I joined the military was I wanted to work in the medical field. I liked the idea of serving the nation. I felt like that would, not only look good on a resume, it would help me feel good. So it was a little bit of a self-satisfaction, and also it was to get me my first footsteps in the field of radiology, get me some experience, get me 6 years work experience in the Army as an X-ray tech. Technically 3 months of it was at boot camp.
Yeah. So I mean, okay. So you got this, this huge. I guess we're going to call this story. All right. So you get this whole problem of you can't get a job. So you decided to join the military, and now because you decided to join the military and you're now negotiating all these things to make this particular your dream of fulfilling this particular type of career path for you, there's got to be a lot of things you're going through on your head, right? There's a lot of things you're thinking about, like I guess is there doubt involved in this particular process? Are you worried about basic training? Is there any considerations of having to potentially go to like a war, or are promises made like, no, you're not going to do that?
Well, there's no promises. If in wartime, it doesn't matter what you are. If the military, at least the Army, I don't know how the Air Force, Navy, Marines, or the Coast Guard, I don't know how they operate, but in the Army, if deemed absolutely essential, you can be reclassed. You're essentially saying, oh, what are you? You're a 68 Papa? Nope. You're now a 68 Whiskey, a combat medic. We're going to retrain you, we're going to reclass you, train you up, and then if we need to send you into a combat zone, we've trained you for it. So there's no guarantee.
Was that ever in the back of your mind?
It's always in the back of my mind because it's something that is a very real thing. Luckily, though, there was never a situation where I looked at it and I thought that it was likely. I thought this is a very off chance. Now, if I deliberately chose to be a 68 Whiskey, a combat medic, my chance of going to a combat zone, I believe, went up significantly. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, I paid attention when the recruiter said, I'm paying attention to the name combat medic for a reason. There's not a combat radiology tech.
Yeah.
All right, you don't need ionizing X-rays on the field of battle. You don't. You
hope not.
I hope not. I mean, radiation from a nuke is bad enough, but if they were to send a 68 Papa, I would be not in the combat. I would be at a FOB, a forward operating base, where someone who returned from the front lines with a gunshot wound, and I need to quickly shoot an X-ray to see where the bullet is and what damage has been done to the bones.
Yeah.
Like, I could be sent not to fight, but to literally be just behind the front lines, ready to fight if needed, but not as one of the active fighters.
Okay, so a couple of questions pop into my mind automatically when I think about this. One of the questions I wonder is that I'm sure part of the military training you had to become familiar with firearm training.
Absolutely.
And did you have any reservations or any sort of trepidation regarding this kind of training?
I'm not against the use of firearms. I'm not the type of person who feels the need to carry a gun all the time. I understand, but at the same time, I don't deny people, their Second Amendment right. Like, for instance, if someone wants to buy one gun or 100 guns, I feel like that is their business, so long as they have demonstrated that they're mentally capable, they're not unstable. I feel like they should be vetted if they have a criminal background or stuff like that. I feel like there are disqualifying factors, but for the most part, I'm not reserved about firearms or their use. I understand that here in America, a lot of people die every day to firearms. I understand that, but I also understand that most people who do have firearms are responsible with them. And so I believe that a firearm is just a tool, and it can be used for good or bad depending upon the intent of the wielder.
Okay.
So that is my personal feelings towards a gun.
One other question I have for you is, do you own a firearm today?
I own technically a small little .22 that was gifted to me by my grandpa on my mother's side, I think, shortly before he died. Small little .22, not that strong, a little bolt, a little, you load in a round, cock it back, fire, and then you load in another bullet. So no, I don't think there's a mag or anything like that. I've never fired it. I'm not, like I said, the gun is there, but it's locked away. My father, like has never taken me to a range. I've never really felt the need. Like I said, I'm not a gun nut. I understand, other people who want to own guns and fire them all the time. That's fine. Do it at the range. Be safe. Be responsible. Like demonstrate, muzzle safety, muzzle awareness, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do own own a gun. But like I said, I'm not one of those people that feels like I need to concealed carry or open carry.
Okay.
It's just one of my things.
Yeah,
but I don't. But other people who want to, I feel like I'm like, fine, just be responsible, be smart, be safe.
Okay.
Don't be stupid.
All right.
It's asking a lot for Americans, I know.
Well, I'm not going to make assumptions. I'm gonna hope that most people use their better judgment and things are safe. And as you mentioned, that there are lots of people who own guns and are responsible. So you can't blame a few bad eggs, or a few bad apples for the whole bunch. That's however you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously with military training, we talked a little bit about guns. There's a physical element to military training, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that kind of experience. What's it like?
Well, PT, we pretty much, it's just physical training. All it is just basically, at any given point in the Army, the standard is you're supposed to be combat deployable. What that means is you're physically capable of being like, oh my God, World War III just happened. You're going out. The chances of that happening, almost slim to none. But the goal, the idea behind that is you need to be ready for anything at any time. Mm-hmm. So we have a biannual, twice a year PT test. When I was and I served from 2013 to 2019, we had 3 categories: push-ups, sit-ups, and the 2-mile run. You did as many push-ups as you could within 2 minutes. You did as many sit-ups as you could within 2 minutes, and then you ran 2 miles as fast as you could.
Okay.
So the goal, and then that was just the physical exertion. Then there was also body weight or body shape, however you term it. Basically, if your body fat composition appeared to be over a certain percentage, you were deemed overweight, and then you were put on some special extra PT assignments where you would get up extra early and you would try to essentially work your way to slimming down.
Did people? Was that something that was common, or was it?
I was on it. It can be common because, for me, I believe it was the months of April and October were the annual PT tests. Mm-hmm. Every now and then, but they wouldn't just test you. They would be like, okay, PT test is 2 months away. And my unit in the radiology department, we'd be like, okay, we're going to do a mock PT test. We're going to see how you all handle up, and then after we're done with the PT test, we're going to go measure your height and weight. And if you're over a certain weight, we're going to tape your stomach. For guys, we would tape stomachs and necks. For women, they would tape stomach, hips, and neck. And they would determine if you're within regulation. And if you were deemed overweight, either by just the sheer weight or by the taping, you were put on a special PT program where it's like, look, we don't want you to fail the actual real thing. Otherwise, that could hinder your career. And if you repeatedly fail the real thing, mm-hmm. you can get discharged. You can get kicked out of the Army. I believe.
Is it dishonorable?
No, it would be considered. I only know of 3. There's dishonorable, honorable, and less than honorable. I believe it would be considered a less than honorable. I just simply was given an honorable discharge because I served my time. No major mistakes, no screw-ups like that, So an honorable discharge is what most people get. Less than honorable is like when you're not able to adhere to a standard, whether it be you're not able to do your job, not able to pass a PT test. For whatever reason, if you're not able to fit in, you're given less than honorable. Dishonorable discharge is when you've really done something wrong.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, I guess one of the next thing I would like to know is like, what do you feel like were your chief accomplishments through your military service?
Well, not only did I get my experience in the field of radiology, 6 years, I made sergeant, just barely, just barely.
And also, and so for sergeant, what does that mean for like people who don't know?
So basically, a sergeant is the first official rank of, well, technically a corporal is, but like some people look at a corporal, in terms of pay grades, there's E1 through like E9, and E4 is a specialist. Now, when you go from E4 to E5, you've gone from a specialist to a sergeant. A corporal is technically an E4 in terms of pay grade, but it's technically also considered like a sergeant-ish. It's not as high ranking as sergeant. Like if a corporal and a sergeant are face to face, sergeant always outranks the corporal.
Okay.
Unless otherwise dictated by a higher ranking authority figure.
Sure.
But when it comes to being an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, you are technically in charge of privates and specialists. You are responsible for governing them, guiding them. You take orders from officers or other senior ranking non-commissioned officers, and basically you're essentially the muscle. The muscle of the Army is specialists and privates, and the ones who oversee that muscle are the non-commissioned officers. So if you want to look at it in terms of like, they're the ones that, but they're also out there, like technically they're out there with the the specialists and the privates, physically doing it, physically achieving it together. Like in combat, for instance,
so they're side by side.
They're side by side, but
afar.
not dictating from afar. That would be commissioned officers. That would be officers. For instance, like lieutenants, captains, colonels, generals.
Sure.
Officers are the ones who, like a combat situation, for instance, officers are more likely to be giving orders. Some of them will fight, but most of the fighting force will be comprised of the non-commissioned the rank. Either it will be sergeants and specialists and privates.
We're going to get back to this particular thing because I would like to know why that is, but I'd like to know more about what you personally achieved, so that way we've explained the range.
Yes, so what I achieved was I made sergeant, which is good on a resume because it shows a position of leadership and authority and accountability, but I also managed to get my CT license. So I advanced my own personal career in the field of radiology, which is the main reason I joined. I joined primarily for radiology. And while I was there, I wanted to get CT and MRI. I couldn't get MRI because the opportunity never came up, but I wanted to get at least CT done. Because being good at X-ray and CT helps me become more marketable. Because in the field of radiology, the more, or any career actually, the more you can do, the more valuable you are to any potential employer. Anyone who hires you, like if you have to make a cut, who are you going to cut? The person who's good at one thing or the person who's good at three things?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So the more I can do, the more valuable I am as a worker. And that's just my work ethic, one of many aspects of my work ethic. Okay. It's something my parents deeply instilled in me. I was like that before I was in the military.
Okay.
So a sense of pride and duty is also what I obtained in the military. I understand. I'm definitely like in the military. You're not allowed to, let's say, you're not allowed to criticize the government. But now that I'm out of the military, I can criticize the government. But I still have a better understanding of you know what? I understand. Like I said, people I think look at the military and I think they just don't have the right mindset to understand. It's not exactly the easiest job in the world. It's very stressful, and I mean it's very stressful. And not everyone's perfect. People slip up. People make mistakes. So I look at the military with a bit more nuance now that I've served in it. It's like getting your feet wet or experiencing something always gives you a better perspective than just being an outsider looking in. So being in the military, I understand I'm still critical of the military in terms of certain aspects, but I have a better appreciation of the fact that there are people, who are signing up for the heightened opportunity to die for us. Even if, for myself in the field, I didn't think it was likely, that was always a possibility in my mind that I could be sent to a combat zone. I could be in the line of fire. By being in the military, I am increasing the chance of my finding myself in a circumstance where I may be killed. I understand that. That was always in my mind. As unlikely as it was, I knew that increased chance was there. versus not
Do you think that it caused you a lot of stress and anxiety?
No, because like I said, I put it in the right perspective. Joining at the age of 27, I wasn't some anxious youngster. I was a little bit more seasoned in terms of my mental maturity. I understood that depending upon the job that I took and how I set myself up, I could kind of like reduce the chances. But yes, it's always there, it's always present. It just wasn't nagging or overbearing to me mentally. Just not. That's just. And I made sure to always. But I made sure to always keep that in perspective. That you know what, I'm serving my nation. Yeah, and there I have a greater chance of dying because of this. As unlikely as it may be.
I think that like there's a couple things that obviously come into play when it comes to discussing the military. And since you said that after military you can kind of perhaps look at it with a little more of a hard look when it comes to things, be a little bit more questioning of certain things. And I mean there's this idea of indoctrination of military ideologies and things like that, like where someone is almost brainwashed to do something or act in a certain way. And I wonder, do you think that that's something that happens in the military, or is it just something that writers and people in Hollywood promote?
I think there is definitely some Hollywood dramatization. Like, for instance, one thing that maybe comes to people's minds if they've seen the movie Full Metal Jacket. Mm-hmm. Now, that is the Marine Corps. I can't speak from experience on the Marine Corps. I'm not fully, I'm not at all informed on the Marines and how they do things. Mm-hmm. From my experience in the military, I went to basic at Fort Jackson, South Carolina for 3 months. That was my basic. That was my boot camp. I did not go to AIT. AIT is where you essentially you're trained in that specific MOS, your specific job. Mm-hmm. Whereas boot camp is literally kind of like the jack of all trades. You're just introduced, and everyone goes through the same training that you do. You go through red phase, white phase, blue phase, mm-hmm. and then at your AIT training, you would go through the specific training that you would need for your MOS. I skipped AIT entirely, mm-hmm. which is very unorthodox.
I see.
Highly rare. I should have gone to AIT anyway.
And what exactly is AIT exactly?
AIT specifically is like in the field of radio. I would be trained how to be in radiology tech, mm-hmm. for me. Or you would go there to be trained as a combat medic, or you would be trained to be a lab tech, or AIT is essentially the training for your specific job in the Army that is not combat related unless you are a combat MOS.
Okay.
So you would be trained specifically to do your day-to-day job. Mm-hmm. So for me, that would be learning how to do x-rays. You would be learning basic anatomy, physiology, stuff like that. I was already nationally certified though. So when I was at my MEPS, my military entrance processing station, I was given, I benefited in a way I technically shouldn't have. Normally you would just graduate boot camp, then you would go to your AIT, and if you say, hey, I'm good enough, you would test out. It's kind of like a CLEP. You would CLEP your way out.
Sure.
I technically did not have to do that. I literally went from boot camp straight to duty station. I skipped step 2 for AIT entirely. Very unorthodox.
How much time was normally spent in that particular thing?
Depends on the MOS, depends on your job. Some people it's several weeks. For my field as a 68 Papa, it was a full calendar year. 6 months at Fort Sam Houston. Wow. In a classroom college environment, learning the basics of anatomy, physiology, x-rays, and then 6 months of clinicals at a facility that participates in. Not all military bases participate in clinicals for all MOSs. Some places do, some places don't. So I went to Fort Leonard Wood for my duty station. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was stationed for the rest of my career. Literally, almost. I spent 3 months of basic at Fort Jackson. Mm-hmm. I did 1 month of what's it called? Of like temporary duty. I think TDY at the Yuma Proving Grounds. Uh-huh. But the rest of the time, I was assigned to the rest of my entire military career, Fort Leonard Wood. Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Out in the middle of the Ozarks.
So basically it's like your home away from home.
It was my home away from home. I spent pretty much my entire military career there. But in terms of indoctrination, I would not look at the army as the type of that tries to brainwash you per se. I look at the like you see like Hollywood movies where they train you to be uncaring, unfeeling, unempathetic, and a stone cold killer. That is clearly not the case. The army is filled with different people with different personalities, behaviors, mannerisms, cultures, subcultures, backgrounds. We welcome just about everyone in terms of like in terms of who's allowed in, and as long as you just don't do something terrible, you're pretty much free to be yourself.
Okay, so this brings into something that's kind of comical, but hey, the old movie Stripes.
Yes, Bill Murray.
Bill Murray, yeah. So that's obviously like a really like a comical, I would say almost a parody.
It is a parody military movie,
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
And so like when you say that there's a diverse set of personalities and things, were there Bill Murray-esque characters?
Yes. Now you weren't allowed to go up to like a like a lieutenant colonel or a general and go, "That's the fact, Jack." You would have gotten your ass in trouble for that. But in terms of different personalities, I myself was like kind of like a laid back, energetic, comical kind of person.
Yeah.
All throughout my career.
Okay.
People knew who I was. They knew what I was about. And they understood that it's like, look, as long as you do your job, show up at the right time, right place, speak with respect when needed, you don't have to be full hooah. Hooah is kind of like I'm sure you might have heard the term where it's like hooah or oorah, I believe is like the Marines one. Oorah, yeah. Hooah is kind of like the concept of like, that army mentality.
Sure.
Most people in the army that I saw, they know that when to switch it on, when to switch it off.
So that kind of makes me think: is there a chance that it just was the place you were stationed at? That was the atmosphere of the station, and not just other places.
Absolutely, I had some people from different units who transferred in. They said like, this is not the real army, in terms of like. But I know that people. But I'm like, based on, and I'm like, because they're looking at this and like, this is not the real army. The real army would not be this laid back. But at the same time, and I'm like, I look at these people who come here, and I see they're not super serious all the time. They're laughing, they're smiling, they have sarcasm, they have humor.
Does that like thing? Do you think that it happens like as they integrate with the people, or is it something that they off the bat right away they show?
They understand. Like, I look at it as this. Like, I think with the unit that I was with was more laid back, but that doesn't mean the other units aren't laid back. They're just not as laid back. They're not as casual about it.
Gotcha.
So, like, we had more people that were joking around while on duty, cracking jokes, stuff like that. I'm absolutely sure that there are people that do that, in all the other units all over the nation. They just might not be as casual or carefree about it. But I mean, when people get here, they're not super serious. Like when people transfer from other units, they're not super serious. They're not stone-faced, emotionless. They're not robots. They're people. They crack jokes, they smile, they laugh, they mess around, they joke around. And the unit that I was with really allowed people to just be themselves. And I do like that. I was able to befriend a lot of people. We cracked jokes, I met my roommate. My roommate when I got there, because we were in the barracks.
Sure.
He was a Filipino who lived off Watt Avenue. Literally.
So also, you guys travel halfway across the country and are basically in the same general vicinity?
Yes. My roommate that I lived literally with, because in the barracks, we share rooms. You don't just get a barracks all to yourself unless you're like, higher up in the ranks. But as a specialist, throughout most of my career, I shared a room with someone. The guy I shared a room with used to live off Watt Avenue.
So I guess that's another thing I was wondering about too, is that when it comes to the military, it's at least the modern version of it that you see, at least in media, is just that it's really diverse and there's all these different people from all these different backgrounds. Does that kind of hold up true from what your experience was? Or
Absolutely. We had people, and I went in boot camp, we had a guy fresh from China, barely spoke English, was using, serving the military in order to gain citizenship.
Wow.
We get everyone from all over. And there was some jokes made, in boot camp. I mean, like a lot. We're not going to say them here because there was, like it wasn't meant to be like, they weren't abusive jokes. They were just kind of like sarcastic, fun stuff.
Was it like stuff along the lines of like, maybe you're here to learn our secrets kind of thing?
No, it was more along the lines of a bunch of the language that he learned was just swear words. That was like he learned how to curse from us, his fellow recruits. He learned how to curse. We all cheered for him when he turned around to one guy and said, "Fuck you." And we're like, "Yeah, man, you go." So we were like, "Yes, welcome. You're now one of us." Telling people to fuck off. So we had, like I said, people are coming from all over the world, not just the country, the world, to now. Very rarely, I think there was one other person in my company in boot camp that was there. That was, I believe, like a foreigner trying to acquire citizenship.
Sure.
He faced, from what I can remember, no hatred or discrimination or ostracization based on the fact that he wasn't already a citizen. We know that we're all different. We're all different backgrounds. So, when it comes to bringing people in, people from different all colors, creeds. Like I said, we had a guy who his name was Miles. He was on a college scholarship, I believe. Suffered an injury and lost his scholarship, and was forced to, join the military. So people came in to the military, like me, where it wasn't their primary option. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the number one goal. They didn't, some people have the dreams of, I want to be a policeman, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a soldier. Some people have that inspiration and that drive. For me, the military was just a stepping stone. It was a ladder. And as long as I maintained that right perspective, I understood going to the military, this is probably not for me. I probably won't go full career. I don't intend to go full career upon entering. If I do, it's something that it's a decision I made partway along the way, where I weighed all my options of being in the military for the rest of my career versus not being in the military. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, like I said, you have to have the right mindset to really be able to hack in the military. You got to be able to know what the military is about. You got to really have the right mindset to just make the best decisions. And I looked at the military and I'm like, I could go full 20. I have what it takes. I think I would be happier not to be in the military for the rest of my career. Mm-hmm. And so far that's been the case. I've been very happy. I like being able to sleep in on my days off. I really like that.
So I guess one of the next questions I'd have to ask is that when it comes to your job positions, now that you're out of the military, did you find getting work much easier because you had all this experience now, and so it kind of fixed that problem of initially, or did you kind of run into the same kind of problem?
I got lucky actually. When I first submitted applications while I was in the military, because don't wait to look for a job after you get out. Look for a job and try and secure a job before you get out. Before you finish wherever you're currently at, try and set yourself up for that next step so that transition is smooth. Mm-hmm. So that you don't have a blank gap of, I have nothing, I'm doing nothing. So I was filling out job applications, updating my resume, and pretty much just overall looking to find ways to make sure I got a good job lined up so that when I leave, we're ready to start working immediately. Mm-hmm. And I can just seamlessly transition. Because some people have a hard time transitioning, believe it or not. Some people, depending upon their experiences in the Army, mm-hmm. and their personalities and how they've endured, some people literally have to go through a transition process of going from military to civilian. And it can be very brutal. It's kind of like a culture shock. Like I said, the Army is its own culture and its own way of life. Mm-hmm. And when people leave, not everyone transitions easily back to normalcy. Some people have it very hard. I can't remember the movie where it was one of the guys who was like a bomb defusal expert, an EOD expert guy. Mm-hmm. And he had been deployed, he had been overseas a lot. When he came back from deployment, mm-hmm. Because I think he spent 13 months on deployment at one point.
That's a long time.
He spent a lot of time in in the military, in a combat situation, tense environment, life or death circumstances all the time. When he got back to normal life, normal civilian life, for like, a few months, it just didn't feel the same. He wasn't the same person. And so what was normal for him was now that tense life or death situation. Mm-hmm. So the first opportunity he got, he went back overseas for a 13-month deployment.
Wow. Okay.
Like, it was an EOD bomb defusal expert, and like he'd see, like, it was a movie, so some Hollywood dramatization, but
sure.
Not everyone transitions perfectly from civilian to the army, mm-hmm. or from the army to civilian.
But you, because you didn't experience like the combat, and perhaps maybe because it was a more relaxed atmosphere, was it not?
Yes, because I was actually much closer to home than in terms of culture for me, because mm-hmm. I was in an environment that it didn't force me to change a whole lot. I still learned, customs and courtesies, followed regulations. I had rules to follow, mm-hmm. but I knew that as long as I did not stick out in a terrible way, mm-hmm. I was going to be fine. I knew, like I said, I knew when to turn my army mode on and off. Mm-hmm. I knew when I could be more chilled and relaxed. I would hang out with other, like in the barracks area, we had sergeants and privates, mm-hmm. Like mingling and stuff like that. And in other units, that's generally not acceptable. But in our unit, we didn't care so long as it didn't get ridiculous. Like, obviously no dating between, like, if you want to date within your own power structure, but not within the same unit. Mm-hmm. So, people like for instance, like if you want to, like, do not date within, like, just, I just made it a smart opportunity. Like, for instance, AIT trainees at Fort Leonard Wood, we had recruits that were in phase 2 of AIT. Sure. So they're technically still trainees. Mm-hmm. I, as a permanent party soldier, not allowed to date any of them. So if I found then there was a girl there that I looked at, we had a lot in common, but because of the rules and regulations, I'm like, oh, I can't ask her out, I can't go on a date with her, I can't do any of that stuff.
You can do it now, right?
I can do it absolutely now. I can do it now, but no, I don't. But no, like I said, I could have, like, had I done that,
sure, I
could have been dishonorably discharged if I had gotten caught.
So for the
sake of not throwing away my future, I had to bite that bullet of, like, not making the move on her. Like, I wanted to ask her out. I wanted to get to know her better. I wanted to, like, be in a relationship with her, but I couldn't.
Sure. It's
just one of those things, and I think that's also a testament to
your determination.
The determination, being virtuous, being disciplined. Like, one of the things the Army really stresses is being physically and mentally tough. It's part of the Soldier's Creed. Mm-hmm. I couldn't recite to you the entire Soldier's Creed right now because it's something I haven't refreshed my mind on since I got out.
Okay.
But, one of the things is I am physically and mentally tough. Mm-hmm. And part of being physically and mentally tough is being able to essentially, like, resist temptation, being able to make the better judgment call, and that's really something that most people do. Some people, I don't know why they make the decisions that they do. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was in MEPS, military here in Sacramento, mm-hmm. I didn't go to basic by myself. I was literally staying overnight at a hotel, and then a group of us, like 24 of us, like a dozen to 24 of us, mm-hmm. were leaving the Sacramento airport. We're getting on a bus and going to the Sacramento airport.
Sure. And
we were going to fly all the way to Atlanta. And we did. We flew to Atlanta. Okay. Now, there was a group of 20 of us.
Yeah.
I, as the oldest person in that group, I was pretty much joining the Army as like a grandpa. I was definitely the oldest one there. I was put in charge. Your job is to not lose any of them. And I'm like, yes, Sergeant. I will try not to lose them. But one of these guys, not only did we all went to boot camp, but we were all, like, processed in different areas and stuff like that. But mm-hmm. we ended up at the same duty station at Fort Leonard Wood.
Okay.
Sometime later. He was a lab tech. He was in the laboratory drawing blood and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I later found out he was kicked out of the Army entirely for getting involved with drugs. Oh. He had a wife and a newborn. And I looked at that and I'm like, dude, you can't do that. Your wife doesn't, from what I heard, his wife doesn't have a job, and you got a newborn. Kids are expensive. It doesn't matter where you go in this country or in this world, kids are going to be expensive. You got to be that responsible authority. You got to make the better decision to provide for your family. If you are the only one who's got that reliable source of income, you can't be making those stupid decisions. But he made those decisions, and like, he suffered the consequences for it. And I sometimes find out these decisions that people make, and I look at it, and I'm just like shaking my head, and I'm like, you're a fully grown adult. You're smarter than that. You know that you are responsible as an adult for the well-being of your family. And then you do something like this, it's like, I feel bad for your family. I don't feel bad for you personally. And I'm not trying to be unempathetic or rude, but at the same time, it's like I said, you're a fully functional adult, able body and mind. I try and hold everyone to the same standard I would hold myself to. Mm-hmm. If others are relying on you financially, it's up to you to be the responsible individual and to secure that. Unless it's like eating away or destroying your mental health. I understand that. Or if you think it's a hazardous job and you want better opportunities elsewhere, by all means, yes. But if you're able to do it and you lose the ability and you make stupid decisions and you shoot yourself in the foot, then at that point I've got nothing to do but shake my head at you. Just go, you should have known better. But yeah, other than like I said, we get people from all over, different diverse personalities, diverse cultures, backgrounds. People, like I said, my roommate from over on Watt Avenue, he looked at he looked at life kind of like in a way I like to, in terms of like, it was all about like having fun at the end of the day. He taught me, salud, which means cheers, and he is the reason I acquired a taste for alcohol in the military. I didn't have a taste for alcohol at all, but thanks to him being his roommate, I definitely acquired that taste. He's like, come on, he's like, Mikey, come on over, we're gonna get fucked up tonight, and I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Okay.
He's like, do you work tomorrow? No, all right. Good. But yeah, we get everyone. We had people from all over the world, all over the country, and there are very few people that I just did not mesh with well, personality-wise. Like, there are some punks, who get in, who, the Army will let you in because they don't care about you on a personality level. They care about if you're able to function and just do the responsibilities you are. You can be a complete piece of shit on the inside, but if you're able to do what the Army demands of you, they keep you in. There's no personality test in terms of like, do you look, and I don't think I would want that in the military, because that means it's literally like we only want. That it would be like, it'd almost be like a church at that point. It'd be like screening you. Are you the right kind of Christian? Do you worship God? Do you believe what we believe? And the Army's not like that. The Army will let you in. You can pretend to be a good person when in reality you're a piece of shit on the inside. But the Army does not care. The Army wants you to be able to do your assigned duties, fulfill the role that you're given, and as long as you can do that, you stay in.
I see. I mean, when it comes to the military in general, there's the Hollywood version of it. There's your life experience version of it. But do you think that like anything has shifted for you, like either psychologically, maybe some sort of philosophical opinion on certain things? Do you think anything's really changed since since your time between before you joined, while you joined, and then after?
Probably my sense of patriotism. I'm a little more patriotic now. I know some people that like you hear of the before and after stories. Like before they didn't care, but then there are other people that would, and then after they're done serving, you got people that say like, yes, I would die without hesitation to defend this country and its people. I understand that. I understand where they're coming from now. I understand, like, because the goal of boot camp essentially, is to take you as the individual you are, break you apart a little bit, not shatter you, not destroy you, but break you apart a little bit, then take the values of the Army, put them in, put you back together, and make it so that you're more capable, more resilient, physical and mental toughness, more mentally resilient, and more capable of making good decisions in tough situations and circumstances. You know, mental resiliency is a big thing. They have mental resiliency training that you do like every quarter.
So, what comprises this mental resilience training?
Well, if I remember correctly, you know, a lot of them are taught through PowerPoint, but eventually it reinforces making good judgment, being of good character. If you see something, say something. If you see like abusive behavior going on, you know, in other words, it is kind of like, it's like a constant integrity check. It's constantly telling you to be a good person, reinforcing these good values.
Do you think that this is where the brainwashing kind of thing comes into play a little bit?
It depends on what it means. I think brainwashing would be more about the swearing loyalty to the military and believing in the military as a culture can do no wrong. I feel like that would be more akin to brainwashing. I don't look at the military as something that teaches you to follow orders unapologetically, 100% obediently, without question. As I mentioned earlier, if you feel like if something's happening that is illegal, immoral, or unethical, you are encouraged to say something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that way, if it's something really bad is happening, you can, you know, it can be addressed. But say you had the wrong presumption. Say you thought someone was being given an order that you thought was inappropriate or something, but you didn't possess the full context of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So from your position, like an outsider position, because you're not part of that, you know, you're the C person. It's an A and B situation, and you're the C person, you're the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't possess the context of being one of the insiders, when you're given that full context, you're like, now I get it. And that's something I learned when I was at a board exam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I went to the promotional board, when I went to earn my promotional status, to try and go from a specialist to a sergeant,
Mm-hmm.
sergeant major, who, you know, he's the one in charge of the board. The board is made of 5 high-ranking NCOs, usually a sergeant major, a first sergeant, and 3 either master sergeants or sergeant first class. Occasionally a staff sergeant will be there if they're filling in for one of the higher rankings NCOs. And one of the lessons that I learned live in a board was they asked me a scenario. It's like 2 people are caught doing drugs. One gets a 1-month punishment, the other one gets a 6-month punishment. Do you feel like that is unfair? It's like, well, on the surface level, yeah. But they explain, I gave you very limited information deliberately. I wanted you to, and I want you to understand, do you know everything there is to know about this situation? Do you know everything there is to know about the backgrounds of these 2 individuals? What they did, and could there be anything else in addition to that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, no, you didn't give me that information. It's like, yes, but I'm giving you this information based on an outsider perspective. So it was a lesson of be careful about making judgments
Mm-hmm.
from an outside position when you don't have all the details. And that's something that I learned in that board, and I've carried with me the rest of my life. It's one of the
Yeah, that's an important lesson to learn.
yeah, it's something I see as well, like in day-to-day lives. To comment on American culture, like for instance, when you see a 5-second video of, like, I know this might be culturally insensitive, but like say a cop shooting someone,
Mm-hmm.
and you see just a 5-second clip, and people use that 5-second clip to automatically make an assertion of this is unfair, this is wrong, the cop should be fired, and given death penalty, stuff like that. And I'm like, we only know 5 seconds of what happened. We don't know what led up to this. We don't know the situation. We don't know anything. We really don't know anything. Now, we're allowed to, part of being an American is like we're allowed to make opinions
Mm-hmm.
even when we know nothing about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of that's what freedom of speech is. You can make it, but there's informed opinions and uninformed opinions.
Sure.
If I'm not informed, or I don't feel like I'm informed, I technically tend to hold back my opinions until I have more facts, more details, and more context pertaining to situations.
Mm-hmm.
That way I don't make an uninformed opinion, or as I would like to say, an ignorant opinion.
So, I agree with that to an extent. I operate differently when it comes to that, because I'm more like, I like to poke and prod and question all things, and that's probably just why I do the show. And I think one of the most important things is don't be afraid to say something. I think the thing is that don't be afraid, but with that there's a caveat. Don't be afraid to change your opinion either. Like, and so like, well, I don't mind saying my opinion quickly. I also don't mind changing my opinion quickly. I reserve the right to always be able to change my opinion, and I don't think that any one statement or any one version of something is the whole truth. It is a section of the whole truth. And perhaps as more of the truth becomes illuminated, my take, my position may change.
Adapt on the
Exactly.
and adapt based on new information.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, to me, like, when I'm presented with new facts, new information, I'm always going, okay, well, in a way, with my current knowledge, does this hold true with what I currently know, or is this counter to it? All right, so, considering all of the things that have happened when it comes to, wars and things like that over history, and considering the fact that, like, the past military and the current military today are very different.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Culturally,
think,
yes, absolutely.
do you think that culture differences would dictate the way in which wars would be conducted today? Do you think that, like, the individual people, the mental fortitude, the various training and things like that would allow soldiers that would go to conflicts today to be better prepared for those conflicts, or do you think they're the same?
Well, no matter what's going to happen, there's going to be the military in and itself is a stressful environment. It's just a culture that has stress. I don't think that's anything that can go away. I think it's an unfortunate byproduct of just how the military is. I don't think we can create a happy, fun military in terms of, like, everyone, where it's like got 99%, perfect people in mental health, stuff like that. There's going to be mental health issues. There's going to be PTSD, shell shock, as it was formerly called, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. In terms of, but I feel like our country and our culture just in general are picking up speed and getting better. I think we're catching up to where I think we're probably, in terms of, like, having a better understanding of mental health. Because you used to be, I remember growing up, there used to be a mentality of, suck it up and walk it off. Mm-hmm. Like, now we're getting to the point where we're understanding mental health and mental health issues better and better and more and more. And I think part of the military was kind of meant you're either, you got to be, don't be weak, you got to be strong, you got to power through it. And I think that mentality is in an extent, to some extent, still existent today, because the number one goal of the Army is to fight. You have to win wars, and you don't win wars by essentially bending knees and bending over. You have to be strong, you have to stand up, you have to fight, and you have to essentially risk it all to win. Mm-hmm. So the military has to essentially push through the tough times. You're not going to fight in optimal situations. You're not, the first plan of attack, if it doesn't work, you got to have a backup plan. You got to adapt and overcome. You cannot just look at the military and just demand perfection and optimal situations, optimal work environment, optimal everything. You can't do that. That's just not how life is. And the military really, in a way, in my opinion, kind of exaggerates the brutality of life. Life is not perfect. It's not poetic. We're not skipping down Gumdrop Road, but, holding hands.
Do you think that like type of ideology, though, about being, hard, I guess is how I would...
Hard, tough, or even brutal, yeah.
Is necessary for the crafting of a particular fighting force? Is it something that's necessary, or do you think it's just a doctrine that's just been, we're going to follow it because it works?
I feel like it absolutely is necessary. I feel like if you're gonna, because it's not easy to take another life. I mean, as someone who's worked in the medical field, I've seen a lot of people just die. Not too long ago, I came in on the start of my shift in the trauma bay. I saw a 4-year-old who had been hit by a car. Head was like partially split. Mm-hmm. Mother was in tears. I have seen, in the military, I saw a 2-year-old who had drowned in their pool because they were left unsupervised. I've seen death. I know what that's like. I've never killed anyone, and I imagine being the physical force to take a life is different than just simply watching someone die from a third-person perspective. Being the force that has to take a life. I imagine it's not easy, but it requires a certain mental toughness and mental fortitude. It requires a mindset to be able to do. Your enemies are not just going to let you kill them. They're not going to surrender. They're going to kill you. As much as I would like all conflicts to be resolved peacefully, that's just not the reality we live in. Ideally, I would like to put an end to wars. I'm very much not in favor of fighting wars. I historically like regime change wars. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of war being utilized for political or economic advantages. I'm not a big fan of that. But I understand that sometimes war is just ultimately inevitable. And when it does become ultimately inevitable, when it is the last resort, you need to be ready. You need to be able to...
And so the training facilitates that, prepares you for those kinds of mindsets.
Combat ready. And part of being combat ready is being able to do what must be done. And some people... it changes them.
Do you think that you being combat ready according to the medical thing when you're doing the training, do you think that if you were forced into a situation that you could have took a life?
That is the question of the day. It is not easy to say that I could or could not.
But just
if I did,
just think
I probably would have been able to do it, but it probably would have changed me, knowing that I willfully chose to take another life. Even if that person was trying to kill me or someone I cared about, taking another human life is not something that is, quite frankly, not for the faint of heart. It's not. It's something that can change you. And I can definitely say for certainty that part of the suck it up, tough it up, walk it off, that mentality has existed for a long time in a lot of militaries because it is true. Now that doesn't mean don't say anything. If you're hurting, don't say it. We've gotten better with, like I say, catching up with mental health, and if you have issues, bring them up. But if wars need to be fought, there are wars that need to be won. Mm-hmm. And you don't win them by being nice. You win them by doing the dirty work. You win them by doing what must be done, which is brutal, it's savage, and it's kind of barbaric, but war is barbaric.
So do you think that when a journalist goes into a war circumstance and paints a less than flattering picture of what's going on there, often painting the U.S. when it comes to some of the more recent conflicts as enemies, and describing some pretty disturbing acts, do you think that those particular acts might be taken out of context, kind of like we were talking about earlier with the whole information, only having part of the information then making assumptions?
Yes, there are some acts that might not be understood, like for instance, the blowing up of a building and you see dead children. You're like, on the surface level, that looks and sounds absolutely terrible and irredeemable. Mm-hmm. But we don't know, could there have been someone on the second floor shooting at them? And so that building had people in it and they were using hostages as last minute body shields. That does happen. The military, the U.S. military, we have a certain code of conduct that we have to operate by. We must operate by. Not every soldier does it, regrettably, unfortunately. But, for instance, if we kill someone and they have dog tags, you cannot take those dog tags off and keep them as a trophy. Inexcusable, not allowed. As much as you want to take it as like a war trophy, saying you did something, can't do that. Now, our enemies might do that.
Are you allowed to take war? Is that something that's actually a thing that you can do in?
You cannot. Maybe like a weapon, perhaps. But in terms of individual dog tags,
I meant
desecrating the dead, or like for instance, wasn't there? There's a Native American tribe. I don't remember, but they would scalp the enemies. They would scalp the Native Americans that they killed and stuff like that, or cutting off the tongues or the toes, stuff like that. Desecrating the dead is absolutely not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. You can't take a war trophy from a dead body. Not like that. Not especially if it's a part of them. And if it's ID tags, absolutely not. Because you must show respect for the dead. It doesn't matter who they are. They could be some insurgent terrorist. They could be anyone. They could be someone who would literally set your corpse on fire and make it so that if you were brought back, they could never identify you. It does not matter. We have codes that we must operate by. So we still try and play by a certain set of rules based on a sense of ethics and morality.
Do those rules ever get in the way of like doing certain things?
Sometimes they can. Like, for instance, you're not allowed to execute a hostage or a prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
If that person is jeopardizing your life, and I'll give you an example that I was given by when I was at WLC, which is a school that you go to for like a month, you know, where you kind of like take basic college level stuff to learn how to be a sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like one of the first steps in learning how to actually get to be a sergeant. I was told a story by someone who already was a sergeant, because back then you could be a sergeant before you went to BLC or WLC, but now you have to take it before. But if you wanted to become a sergeant to a staff sergeant, then you must have taken, you know, WLC. But I was at WLC and we had E4s, me as a specialist, and then sergeants. One of the sergeants who had deployed told me a story about how his unit had to make a very tough call. They had a prisoner, restrained, no direct threat to anyone. They were trying to get him to a vehicle, and they were under enemy fire. And the guy was physically trying to push people and body block other soldiers to try and get them shot. He was physically trying to handicap the efforts of the soldiers to safely get to the vehicle, as well as not physically getting to the vehicle. He was a hostage.
Did they shoot him?
They shot him in the head and killed him, and then they threw his body into the vehicle. That's the story I was told.
Mm-hmm.
Not dropping any names. I don't know if this is true or unverified, but I look at this and I'm like, this is a very tough call to make. Do you follow this code of ethics to jeopardize the soldiers around you, yourself, and the entirety of the mission for one life? That's a very tough call to make. It is something that is made at the moment. It's not an easy call to make. It's not something you make lightheartedly. I'll give you another example. When I was in
So these aren't split-second decisions, though. Do you think that they're actually cognitively acting things out? It's not like an impulse?
In that situation, I can't tell you because I wasn't able to question the guy who was telling the story. I wasn't able to be like, did he know that he would possibly have to make this decision, or was that something he thought up and acted on right on the spot? That I can't speak to because I honestly do not know. Another example of a decision is when one of my drill sergeants told me the story about how when he was deployed as I think he was either a specialist or a sergeant, and on the orders of a higher up sergeant, mm-hmm. they saw an enemy moving down the street, mm-hmm. in a position, you know, moving to change position, and he was like, and the drill sergeant, you know, ordered, take him down, pulls up, boom, gets him, goes over to him, unarmed civilian.
Okay. When you hear stories like that, what is the ethics that you think goes into it? Do you think that they're morally correct in doing acts like this, or do you think that there is something else going on involved in that? Like, is there...
Remember, this is a combat zone. So the problem you have is, I understand people would look at this and be like, you should not have done that. He was presenting no threat. He was moving away from you. And it's like, they were recently under fire.
But like a combat zone was still somebody's home, though. That's how I look at it. Like, I probably am like... I would be viewed as a liberal from this perspective, because mm-hmm. to me, when I hear something like that, I'm like, you're a foreign person, agent, mm-hmm. power, in a land that's somebody's home. Person did not take acts of aggression towards that individual, and yet that person was still shot. Maybe they don't have the ability to leave the combat zone, because some parts of the world don't have the same types of resources we do. Yeah. So to make the assumption, if it's a combat, which I feel, I mean, maybe I'm imposing some here thought, because I kind of feel like maybe mm-hmm. there was something there, but it almost seems like because it was a combat zone, they should have got out of Dodge, you know, kind of idea.
I'm not going to blame them. Some people are probably like, if there's like explosions, if there's all hell breaking loose around you, some people literally hunker down in a corner, in the bathtub, in a closet, whatever, and they try to do what they can to stay alive until the shooting dies down, and then when they get the chance, they'll make a break for any semblance of safety they think they can find. From what I understand in this situation is, that situation, the drill sergeant then followed the story by saying, I was investigated for a potential war crime. But because, one, he was following orders in a combat zone, any responsibility was given to his superior. Because when you're a superior, when you're a commanding officer, when you make these calls, you bear the full responsibility and the weight of those decisions. Now, I know some people will say, well, the person who does that should feel bad because the excuse of, I was just following orders, doesn't excuse you. It's like, no, it doesn't excuse you from what you did. The weight of pulling that trigger and shooting that innocent civilian still weighs on you. You could tell, like, but you could tell, like, in the story, you know, the drill sergeant wasn't proud of this. He was not proud of what he had done. He was telling us a story of him doing something tragic to give us context of, this is a grim reality we live in. This is war, and sometimes bad things happen to good people or innocent people, and it's not justified. We try to minimize it with our rules and our litigation. We try to minimize this as much as possible. Collateral damage is inevitable. That's just war. I would prefer if war were fought in areas where there were no civilians, where there were no cities. But unfortunately, we don't always get to choose where the enemy wants to engage. Mm-hmm. I would say that the enemies that choose to engage in urbanized areas, I would say that if they choose to use this battleground, then that means they're choosing to put the lives of others at the greater risk. At the same time, though, we exercise caution as best we can. And I will say this. When you are in life-death situations, it's one thing for an outsider to say you shouldn't shoot until fired upon. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's easy to say that when your life isn't the one that could be taken at a moment's notice. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. I personally am of the opinion that your life is already at greater risk. You've already put yourself, and I have this feeling towards firemen and police officers, first responders. You're putting your life in jeopardy already. Yeah. As a first responder or as a member of a combat.
Sure.
I'm not going to ask you to take greater risks to your life because you're already doing so for the sake of others. Mm-hmm. You're already doing so. There have been plenty of suicide bombings where innocent civilians have had, or terrorists has posed as an innocent civilian to try and kill themselves and as many soldiers as possible. This is just an unfortunate reality we live in. Now this is it's unavoidable. That's why when soldiers see someone coming at them, the first thing they do, they get ready in case something happens. They don't want something to happen, but they're ready in case something happens. They don't let their guard down. And sometimes, you might accidentally kill someone who didn't deserve it. We try and mitigate that as much as we possibly can. It's not easy. Like, a lot of people think it's easy to they look at life in a black and white, right or wrong. You can't slice life into black and white. It's white on one side, black on the other side, and there's countless shades of gray.